Welcome to Discussions with the Writer Fred, right here at Black Video News in rainy San Antonio, Texas. Today we want to talk about the subject of the black vote and the attempt to curb the black vote. And this is a problem this country has had to confront for over 100 years. Once black Americans became citizens, they then tried to use the grandfather clause to stop the vote, the poll tax to stop the vote, and if those methods didn't work, then they turned to violence. The Ku Klux Klan and other organizations would literally attack blacks and intimidate them not to vote. Finally, in 1965, President Johnson, with the assistance of a lot of civil rights workers in the South, Dr. King and John Lewis and others, were able to get the Voting Rights Act passed. That bill has opened up the door for a lot of blacks to get elected, leading right up to our President Barack Obama in 2008, taking office in 2009. Because of that, now we have seen an attempt to turn that around. And most of these attempts, I believe, I'll go right on the line and say, are coming from the Republican Party because of the fear of the black vote. In the state of Georgia, we have a black woman who could possibly become the first black female governor in the country. Then we have a black man running for governor in Florida, another black man running for governor in the state of Maryland. This has sent a lot of fear through the Republican Party, so they're coming up with all kinds of ways to block the vote. And that's what we're going to talk to today with two experts on the subject. I have with me Mr. Gordon Benjamin, a graduate of Prairie View A&M, and also was 6 years Deputy Volunteer Register in Bexar County. Welcome, brother. My brother. Make a sci-fi. All right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Yeah.
Dr. Williams, how are you today?
Okay. We also have Mr. Lane Denton, who's been with us before. Lane Denton is a former state legislator here in Texas from 1971 to 1977. He became a part of what was called the Dirty 30, a famous group, or maybe infamous group, that took on the powers to be in the state legislature and brought about some changes. And he's also been regional director for President Carter, and also he worked in the candidate Ted Kennedy's campaign in 1980. I want to welcome you also, Lane.
Thank you, Fred. It's delighted to be here, and we could take a whole show and talking about some of the battles of the Dirty 30 and
right.
And we're going to Texas legislature.
We're going to have that someday. We'll have that show.
Good. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. But,
and good to be here with Mr. Benjamin.
Yeah. So let's get right down to it, gentlemen.
For voting rights.
Yeah.
My goodness.
I made the statement: Republicans really are attempting to sabotage the black vote. Mr. Benjamin, you want to start it out, please, and respond to that, if you don't mind?
Well, when you look at it, initially this began after the end of the Civil War. The first 10 years after 1865, black representation in the federal government was at its highest level. And then you have the introduction of Jim Crow laws, where local officials began to pass laws that would disenfranchise black voters, because there were senators and people in the House of Representatives elected from the southern states, and those folks at the local level wanted to turn that around. And that's where you had the beginning of the disenfranchisement of the black vote. But now, since the election of former President Barack Obama, you find what we see as voter purging. You find more voter suppression tactics. For instance, the closing of polls in predominantly Latino and African American polling places to cut down on that number. Arizona did that in 2016. And you have voter purging. There are several states, among them North Carolina and Ohio and Michigan and Indiana, who have purged voters from the voting rolls. And in Georgia, which you mentioned earlier, in 2017, Kemp, the candidate who Republican candidate for governor, purged 617,000 people from the voting rolls in the state of Georgia. And right now there's 53,000 voter certification or voter registration applications that are being held up, and 70% of those applications belong to African Americans. So it's no coincidence when you find this pattern that goes through states such as North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. And in Michigan, they decertified 117,000 people, and the candidate for Republican nomination for president and the Republican president only won that state by about 31,000 votes.
So that could have made the difference.
Could have made the difference. And the predominant part of those people whose voter participation was disenfranchised were African Americans. So that suggests to me, you know, even if I had on blinders or didn't have but one eye in the middle of my forehead, that there's a problem with the Republicans. They can't be trusted. And it goes from the candidacy of the Republicans and then the collusion of the secretaries of state, and it filters down into the election administrators at the county level, except for one state, Louisiana has parishes. But again, you have people in that chain of the Republican hierarchy that are determined to keep African Americans and other minorities from voting because they see where that voting strength is becoming formidable.
Sure. Mr. Benjamin, can you imagine anything more important than the right to vote? In a free society, in a democratic country, the privilege of voting. And if we're going to make any significant positive changes, it's got to come from voting.
It has to come from
and the Democratic Party is going to have to double a reorganization at every county level. We've got to get all of our Democratic leaders and join with the League of Women Voters and other organizations to say, we're not going to put up with this. This is absolutely wrong in a democratic country.
Do you think it's going to have an effect on the vote in only 3 weeks?
Well, it can in close elections. Look what happened in 2016. Just a few votes in each precinct could make the difference. And one of the reasons the Republicans do the suppression of vote is because they can usually prevail in a very close election. Because they do a maximum get out the vote. They have networks that can do it. They have all types of strategy.
So how do I know we have to get the people out to vote because a large turnout is going to favor the Democratic Party.
Correct.
Simply because there are more Democrats than Republicans, right?
All right.
And so how do we counter this? What do we have to do?
I think the first step in that strategy is to have the people become educated on the candidates and informed on the issues. And when you recognize what you're up against, it should make the voting public more determined. As a deputy volunteer registrar, I'm a nonpartisan person, right? And sometimes I've considered giving up that position based upon the fact that I want to lean one way or the other. But at the same time, by registering people to vote and encouraging them to go vote, you don't have to vote for a candidate of my choice, but vote against somebody. Just go participate. And the greater the turnout, the better the chances are you of getting good government representatives and that good representation that will address the needs of the people. But when you have a few people voting, that means a smaller number of people are making decisions that will impact the greater number of people in society. And that's not a good combination.
Well, the other thing, Fred, is the Democratic Party, there's no argument, the Republican Party is the worst. Senators like Charles Grassley and Mitch McConnell, they are the best examples of term limits that I've ever seen. But the Democratic Party has to step up. For instance, let's go back to the stimulus and the banking legislation
of 2009.
2009, 2010. The Democratic Party had a filibuster-proof United States Senate. We could have passed any bill we wanted to. We should have made sure those credit card interest rates were not more than 10%. We should have made sure there was no redlining, housing loans, and stopping foreclosures. The Democratic Party should have done that. Also, and I might say, there are 33 developed countries in the world. 32 of them have universal comprehensive the medical care. We're the only country in the world that does not have that. Had the Democrats did that and also passed $15 minimum wage, a living wage, the Democrats would have swept 2016 without a doubt.
Well, they probably wouldn't have lost the Congress in 2010.
The next session over, and started gaining seats in the Congress. And can you imagine? This is what 2020 is all about. If the Democrats can win in 2020 and do the right thing with the right policies and be real Democrats and get money out of politics. Unfortunately, that's a major problem, Mr. Benjamin. Voting, but getting people to vote, but our candidates don't always have the money.
Well, when the Supreme Court ruled that corporations can be considered as people, Citizens United versus whomever, that opened the door for what is now referred to as dark money. And when you have endless tons of money, a specific donor out of Las Vegas that owns several casinos just recently donated $1.3 billion, if I'm correct, to the Republican Party.
The Koch brothers, too.
Well, the Koch brothers are highly visible.
You're talking about Mr. Allison.
Adelson,
casinos.
Casino money. Right now, that's real dark money, in my opinion. But at the same time, when you have a public that needs to be informed as to what's going on, then they can decipher through these ads that are coming out. And most recently, the ads are just stretching bits of the truth without having any facts in them. And they're making the suggestions that Democratic candidates stand for something that they don't represent. So it's a misrepresentation. And you have political action committees that are now able to put ads on television. The candidate may or may not, be in support of what they are advertising, but they're using these attack ads. And we know what happened to John Kerry when he was running for president.
Yeah, he got destroyed
some years ago.
Yeah.
With the Swift boat ads and things of that nature. So the deck is stacked, and again, but the more informed people become, I think the better they can make a decision when they go into the voting booth. And that's to me is going to be the rising tide that takes care of dark money. It takes care of slanted policies. And whenever the Republicans are taking credit for something that was established before they became the majority, that's prevarication, if you want to use a long word from the thesaurus.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
It's a lie.
well,
that's right.
Yeah, that's it.
And education is a big key. And the Republicans want to destroy public education. And they're going about it in a very systematic way. And if we don't change that, it's going to get worse. And the whole thing of vouchers now on your tax bill, you can send your kids to elite private schools, deduct it from your income tax, charter schools. And we haven't done a very good job of integrating housing so that our children are scattered all over the city so they have opportunity to go to every school. And our funding, particularly in Texas, is unbelievably terrible.
What do you think? Let's go back to what you said, Lane, about what should have happened in 2009 when the Democrats had a veto-proof. Well, they didn't have veto, but they had a.
They had 60 votes.
60
Absolutely.
votes. Yeah. So they could have gotten. Why do you think it didn't happen? Was it Obama being cautious, or what?
Well, I think the Democrats in Congress were the problem, and they.
Well, you have to go to Obama, too.
Well, of course, the president, but he felt like he would get reelected in 2012, but that Congress would get reelected. They just didn't realize that. And the power of the lobby took over the health care bill. And the Democrats didn't want to do the minimum wage because it would hurt business. And the banking industry was trying to make sure they didn't get hurt. So there was a lot of factors, but we learned a lesson there. I think the Democrats will prevail in 2020 if they change the total dynamics of the politics. And we'll see in 2021, we may see it come January with a Democratic House of Representatives. That is a major challenge.
Well, the First Lady came out with this, when they go low, we go high. That's kicking our butts. They're winning.
But that's
they don't
exactly
they don't
right.
play they don't play fair.
What Mr.
And so should we start to change our tactics and not play like you mentioned as a deputy registrar, you have to be.
Nonpartisan.
But do you think they feel the same way? They're probably partisan. I bet if people go in there and say, "Make sure you vote Republican."
Well, look what
But
happened.
you're doing it the right way. They never do it the right way.
Fred, the Democrats said, we'll let you pass some federal court positions so we can all go campaign. There'll be no hearings, no votes while we're in recess. The next day, Senator Grassley started holding hearings. His first hearing was a 36-year-old nominee who has no record for an appeals court judgeship. So what do? And the federal courts is so important. And we know what happened. Mitch McConnell blocking the Supreme Court, which we should not have had to happen.
Stolen seat.
And is stolen. The American people should have said no. I worked in Florida, for instance, in 2000. That election was stolen. And you're speaking of voting, Ohio. The way they do it, they reduce the number of voting machines. They certainly do the suppression and the removal of the rolls, and make all the difference. The Florida Highway Patrol set up roadblocks, Mr. Benjamin.
In African American precincts.
Yes, and people turned around. That was an order that came directly from the governor,
Right.
the brother of
Who
the
happened to be a
president.
The brother.
yeah.
But the challenge is, what do you do? Do you create a storm and protest? We're building for that effort, and the Republicans are going to be the cause of it.
Okay, can you hold that point?
Sure.
We're going to take a break and we'll return to that in a couple minutes.
Doing a commercial.
We'll be right back with you.
40% of food in America is never eaten.
Marie, you have prediabetes.
Prediabetes? I don't have time to eat right or exercise. I'm a busy mom.
Oh, you're a busy mom.
Yeah.
This is great news. Busy moms never get prediabetes.
Wait, what?
Let me just... Yeah, this is all the people at risk for prediabetes, and way over here, busy moms. No?
Hey, you.
Yeah, you. Getting that college education? What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job? Be like everybody else?
Or will you dare do something different?
Like, be a teacher. You could be my teacher. You got the skills.
The smarts?
Yes, you. You could be the teacher I never forget.
That'd be cool.
Does that corporate job even have recess? What are you gonna make of yourself?
What are you gonna make of me? I've just been in an accident. What am I supposed to do?
Before you act, let me attack. I'm Nathaniel Mack. Call today, 333-MAC. You don't pay unless we win.
Let's call Matt.
Let's call Matt.
Nothing to do this week? Don't miss another event. Go to blacksinsanantonio.com for our event calendar. The home of the largest business directory in San Antonio with an African American focus. Sign up today for our weekly e-blast and text message alerts. Help us make this a better community. Connect, empower, grow.
Welcome back to Discussions with the Writer Fred with my two great guests here, and we're having an outstanding conversation. So let's continue. Lane, you talked about there's going to be trouble ahead, and what can we do? What can we do? People are concerned about doing it the right. Let me put it this way: people are concerned about doing it the right way against those that don't give a damn. They seem to win. And we can go all the way back to the Obama not appointing a Supreme Court justice when the Congress is out of session, and the fact that when he did nominate somebody, McConnell let it sit empty for 9 months. These guys don't play by the rules. They create the rules to their benefit. And what do we try to do to counter that?
Well, Fred, it goes back that we lost almost 1,000 Democratic House of Representative seats in the state legislatures. We lost governorships, we lost members of the House, members of the Senate. But we should have had a national network, leaders in the Democratic Party reaching to the grassroots and going to Washington, D.C. The black community has been outstanding in saying, hey, we're not going to put up with this anymore, because that's the easy way out. Just, it'll all work itself out. We should have been in Washington, D.C. and said, we want a nominee, and if you're not going to have hearings in the United States Senate, follow the advice of Jonathan Turley, distinguished law professor at George Washington University. Swear the individual in. And we want a good nominee, because we worked hard and we got you elected in 2008, 2012. This Supreme Court is important. And of course, no one had control over the Anthony Scalia dying, but the president had the right to make the appointment. And here's what he should have done.
Yes.
Mitch McConnell, we're not going to pay the soldiers. We're not going to execute until you come off of it and give a hearing and a vote.
But that's playing
well
the way they do. And it seems to me,
what
bless
choice do we
her,
have?
Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. Can we continue to do that?
Dr. Williams, in some fights, you have to fight fire with fire.
Okay.
You have to fight back. And if you see that from 2014 going forward, the Republicans took credit for all of the progress that the economy made, and they weren't doing anything, to accelerate the economy. The job creation, the quarters that the job numbers increased over the last 2 years of former President Obama's terms were not based upon Republican policies. It was based upon what he had done to bail out the auto industry, to bring manufacturing jobs back. You had 70 some quarters, where job creations exceeded what they had been in previous years. Mm-hmm. So being able to look at, what's the end result of this? And there were some contentious races on the midterms of 2014 where people didn't want to be associated for having voted for President Obama. And it was like a negative to those people who were running against some of the same Republicans who are now in office and who are participating and orchestrating these kinds of things that prohibit progress and help deny African Americans and Latinos, the right to vote. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the voter ID laws across the country, North Carolina and Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and Maryland and Florida and Louisiana, all of these things are orchestrated for the purpose of diminishing the impact of the population growth. For example, in 2013, Texas population grew by leaps and bounds among two groups, and they were among African Americans and Latinos. But do you think those two groups received representation in the House of Representatives? No. And the House of Representatives held a hearing here out on San Pedro at Via Metropolitan Transit's headquarters. And I was one of the citizens that spoke up about this is unacceptable, because we had the same fight in 1963 when I first arrived in Texas, and the country was in a state of turmoil in 1963. Mm-hmm. From February forward, with bombings in different places, the murder of Medgar Evers in Mississippi, and then you have the bombing of the 16th Street Church in Birmingham, Alabama, John Kennedy assassinated in November '63. Mm-hmm. So all of this was going on at the same time that voting rights was being brought to the forefront. We're not going to take this anymore. And it was the African American community that went to the forefront with this. And there's a book out by Gary May called Bending Toward Justice. And it talks about the turn of democracy, the changing of democracy, and the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. And it chronicles a lot of what Lyndon Johnson faced. And he wanted all of the turmoil to die down. So they're going to get, his quote was, they're going to get it. Why don't they just stop marching, But at the same time, this has put the pressure on him. And this is one of the things that worked, because August of 63, 250,000 people or more were in Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington. I might have that number wrong, but I don't fabricate the numbers.
250,000.
Yeah, somewhere like
It
that.
also goes to the bottom line of why would a working person, why would a senior citizen, why would poor people vote Republican? I mean, it's really amazing.
Why? That
It is a great mystery. 93% of the Republicans in the Congress voted against Medicare. In committee in the House of Representatives, 1936, 100% of the Republicans voted
Against.
no. And they voted against minimum wage, they voted against the Civil Rights Act, the Poverty Act, the Voting Rights Act. We're not doing a good, maybe it goes back to education and having quality schools and funding the schools and the teacher salaries. The average, in Texas, $40,000 a year. It's not adequate. It's not a living wage. And the recruitment of schools. The challenge is ahead, so we're going to have to pick up on it and have a broad-based educational program to explain to the citizens. There's no reason 8% or 36% in the last midterm in Texas voted. Horrible.
And the impact of voter ID laws, specifically in Texas, it was ruled in 2014 in the Second District, Southern District, in federal court by Judge Nelva Ramos Gonzalez that there was a discriminatory impact of the Texas voter ID law that impacted students, African Americans, Latinos, women, and senior citizens. And those 5 groups have a tendency historically to vote democratically. So why would a law be written to impact these people? 92-year-old woman who came here from England never had to prove that who she was. But in order for her to get a birth certificate, she came here as a 7-year-old. That's 85 years. There's no record,
A voter ID it costs more than a poll tax.
Right, but at the same time, and that was one part of her argument. And then when they went to the Fifth Circuit, the state of Texas said, well, we'll give free birth certificates away. I was one of the plaintiffs, and I had to get a birth certificate from Louisiana, where I was born and raised. When I first checked the online, they wanted $82.36,
Exactly.
and a young man on a fixed income cannot afford $82.36. But one of my older sisters went to New Orleans, on her way to Atlanta for a family reunion, and got the certificate. The birth certificate cost $15, but you still had to pay to get that certificate in order to come back to Texas and get either the ID or the driver's license. And I voted, on provisional ballots until I was able to get that ID. But how many other people would continue to make that trek or continue to go through that effort to get that, or would they just stop? And one of the things that I questioned about, the public's interest, because I'm not a fan of apathy, and that seems to have settled in various different groups of people. They're going to do what they want to do, so I don't vote. Well, you're giving your vote away. You're canceling your vote out if you don't go and vote. Your vote is your voice.
Well, well, let me ask you before we close, and in fact, as our close, can we turn this around? When we see the country going now, we know that Trump's not right. We know the things they're doing up there are not right. Can we turn this around? Len, you want to take a shot at that first?
If we win the U.S. House of Representatives, I think the Democrats will hold hearings. If you're talking about high crimes and misdemeanors, I happen to think if you consistently lie to the American people, that's a high crime. And it's pretty broad. But that will lay the groundwork for President Trump being defeated or not running for re-election. It will, for instance, Congressman Lloyd Doggett said there's a way to get income tax from the Ways and Means Committee.
His returns.
Get his returns. And it's just got to happen. And we've got to make sure. But again, the pressure, if you remember, Speaker Pelosi said in 2009, I'm taking impeachment off the table. There was no question. George W. Bush, the president, and Dick Cheney, and a number of other high Bush administration people had lied to the American people and went to war in Iraq. Those were war crimes. We had not been invaded by Iraq, and The Democrats should have done something about it.
Okay.
And
Go
along
ahead.
those lines, as far as the lies go, the Bush administration signed a blank check to the banking industry of $748 billion with no checks and balances. And when Mr. Obama was elected in 2008 and began his term in 2009, that was added to his deficit because that Treasury Department wrote that blank check. That should have been something that, should have been brought out. But lately, and over time, you see the obfuscation of the issues, the clouding of the issues by the lies that they tell and by the things that they've done. This president has his family business, his organization and charity and all these things, and is still raking in money under the Emoluments Clause. That is a violation. But
So
again, the Congress does not have a political will to address this because they control the House and they control the Senate. And once that chain is broken, and I think there are enough senators, if we can get 3 senators, to be elected in place of
So
Republicans.
how do we turn it around?
We continue to educate the voting public. And I think there are enough people in the voting public who are going to say, I'm tired of this. Enough. Because you have senior citizens, who they're now attacking Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security.
Yeah.
You're attacking Social Security as an entitlement. People have worked for numbers of years, some 30, some 40, and some even 50 years, to put money into Social Security and expecting that in return. But the Congress borrows money from there, and Social Security does not add to the deficit. Tax cuts, based upon nothing other than giving a break to your donors, does not help progress. That contributes to the deficit. But are they telling us the truth about that? Oh, no.
Well, just yes or no? Can we turn it around?
Yes.
Can we turn it around?
Of course, we have to do it through education and voting.
Okay.
And local community organizations working together.
Okay, I want to thank you all for joining discussion with the writer Fred here today. I think it's been a very provocative, empowering, and educational discussion.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again.
And to my viewers out there, we have to vote. There's no doubt about it. We cannot be turned around and convinced not to vote. We have an important election coming up in just 2 weeks here in Texas. Let's get out and vote, and let's send O'Rourke to the Senate and send them a message. This is Writer with Fred signing off, again, telling our story our way.